When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast. I know it's been a minute. I've been on the road for 5 weeks, and I landed. I'm back in Oregon, as you guys can tell. And I wanted to have my good friend Pete Morton on because he has been also helping out voluntarily, trying to evac folks in Israel. And he's been in the middle of it all. And he's got intel and stuff that the news probably hasn't told us about, that he knows about. And I want to share on our forum, freedom of speech and all that good stuff that you guys are all aware of. But Pete, as you guys know, Pete served in the Army, intelligence, right? Intelligence officer in the Army.
Caveat that with I was enlisted for 8 years and then transitioned to intel. For all the Marines out there that might get, oh my God, he's an officer. I can't talk to this guy or listen to him. I did both. I was a Mustang.
There you go. More respect that way.
I did transition. It's better, I think. But I'm not dogging any of my friends that went to the academy or anything like that. They're good dudes too.
But as you guys all know, Pete's been very busy with everything going on the ground in Israel right now. And I just want to bring on Pete, first of all, to just showcase and say thank you for, volunteering his time and not working for profit and trying to profit off a country's pain and loss and suffering that they're going through, obviously. And I wanted to get something that wasn't news cycle driven, but firsthand knowledge of people on the ground, boots on the ground, of what they're seeing out there. And that's why I wanted to. I reached out to Pete, like, we got to talk about this because we all stand for Israel, and I have friends all over the place over there doing stuff. But Pete, thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Last time I think was Ukraine.
It was
right at the beginning.
Isn't it interesting how we're involved with Ukraine right now? My theory is the military-industrial complex is running the show over there, but they need our help, obviously, because they're dealing with Russia and Iran and China. But now here we are got battleship groups in the Mediterranean Sea, and after Biden gave his speech, God bless our troops, I'm like, oh no. Are our troops going to be on the ground?
I wouldn't. I don't know if I put too much credence.
Copy that.
In what he said there, I think he came back and I had to apologize for a couple of different comments that were kind of made off the cuff and not well thought out. But still, at the same time, you're right. It's when I first went into Ukraine, my goal there was to do a long-term needs assessment and then figure out how we could support this thing. And I just remember everybody was like, this is not going to last very long. And I was like, actually, I think if you look at it historically, like I do, doing predictive analysis, this is kind of following the same footprint. And I know it's totally different. We have different technology. Things move a little bit quicker than they used to. If you look at World War II, World War I, but we're still following the same pattern. If you look at it more generalized, it's, boots are not on the ground right now in Ukraine. We're supporting them financially, just as we did with other countries, during World War II. It took, a huge attack on the United States to get us into the fight. Maybe we're sending a few people over to fight with the UK during World War II, right? But we didn't jump in fully until it was absolutely necessary and there was enough pressure on the president. And it's the same thing that we're kind of doing right now. And now we're starting to see it evolve into multiple fronts, and Ukraine and the Middle East might not, have anything to do with each other. But I do think when people see things evolving and they see, okay, resources are tied up here. There's a lot of money going into this conflict. Well, maybe it's time that we can actually do something without having the repercussions that we would have if there was nothing, going on, if money wasn't tied up in another country. It's the same thing that's happened over, the last few centuries when it comes to the world wars. A lot of times it's not because people are, working together to take over the world. They're just taking advantage of the opportunities that they have capitalize and expand their cause or their lands or whatever they're trying to do. So I kind of saw this coming a few years ago when I started in Ukraine. I just didn't know if the first or the second front that was going to pop up would be in the Middle East or in Southeast Asia, like Taiwan area, and that, which is another thing we just need to keep an eye on. I used to feel kind of concerned about speaking about these things, saying, "Hey, we can predict the future." But I've been right a lot lately, and it's horrible.
It is horrible. Yeah.
I hate it. Yeah.
Loss of life.
If you go back on my feeds and stuff, it's not fun to have to say, "Hey, this is going to happen." But the problem is people are not listening in politics and commercial organizations. They're following another pattern of not being able to accept the reality of a situation and plan and get in front of it. How do we throw a wrench in this cycle that's gone on for years and years and years and consistently happens? And so it is interesting to watch it happen, and sad to see how many people suffer because of it.
Is the news really giving us the accurate description of what's happening on the ground by what we're getting on the different networks in the States? Or what's your thoughts on that?
I kind of saw something that's been kind of developing over the last few years. And I first started seeing it, well, honestly, anybody who was in Intel, when the net came out and the ability to spread information, at lightning speed and stuff, was like, oh boy, this is going to be great. We can use this to do all sorts of cool, operations, and misinformation, propaganda. What I saw in Ukraine was the massive amounts of information being pushed through multiple channels and how difficult it was to actually decipher what was true and what was not. A lot of people, while I was working in Ukraine, I was battling our own problems there from the propaganda being pushed about Americans being there, or the right wing or the left wing and all this stuff. And I was constantly having to talk to people in Ukraine on the ground about what was truth and what was not, and try and debunk the massive amounts of information they're seeing. And then, of course, when it gets spread, it goes viral. It lends credibility to it in certain people's, eyes. And so when this kicked off, I was kind of more prepared for the onslaught of propaganda and information and misinformation. What's funny is a lot of this propaganda is not being spread nefariously. It's just people getting spun up real quick. And that's another thing I've started seeing more of. And I think it has something to do with the way we process crisis nowadays. And I think you're Gen Z, right? I mean, it used to be you had to go, something happened, you'd have to watch the news. You only have a certain amount of time to watch the news. When it was on, you see the story, you get the facts as close as you could get. But it was typically more factual. Right. And that was the information you got. If you wanted more information, you're doing research or calling people, and you only had a few sources to go to. That's not always good. I love having multiple sources of information to tap into. But back then, the information was more vetted, and there was more time put into vetting the information and before they pushed it out. Whereas now we just get it. It's crisis response. It's like people, they intake the information and they're so used to taking in so much of it so fast that it's taken away this. It's like being in a permanent state of fight, flight, or freeze.
Interesting. Wow.
When you do that part of your brain kicks in and all logic and reason is out. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot with the people who are getting involved in the protests, and these protesters that are out there being violent and angry and what about this? But then you ask them a specific question about what they're protesting about and they can't answer it. And then they get more.
Because it's emotionally driven, right?
Because they're going, and they're going from intake of information, emotional response, anger, and they're so used to doing that. And then before they can even go back and kind of take a break, and maybe logically process the information, something else is coming in, something else is happening. I saw this. It's funny. I picked up on this with my kids and video games. And when I started seeing some behavioral problems with my oldest, where he couldn't process. You asked him to do something, it was intake, anger. And I know that he probably got a lot of that from me. That's how I was when I was a kid too. But it was to the point of like, this isn't natural. How do what's going on? And I started studying about video games, how that keeps you in a heightened sense. And sometimes your brain, because of all the information you're taking, whether you're playing I don't let them play first person shooters and stuff, but exciting games where you feel threatened or whatever, your brain sometimes can't differentiate. So you're all the time in this state of fight, flight, or freeze. And so it takes away your ability to logically process the information. And when you do it all the time, your brain starts building those grooves, where the response is automatic. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with people around the world. It's the same with the spread of the information. It pops up in their feed and they go, hey, boom, that's bad. Oh no, oh my God. Without checking it, without verifying it. And like I said, once it goes viral, people aren't verifying the information. And so there's a lot of accurate information out there. People just aren't taking the time to verify it.
No.
And they're just accepting it at face value, and then they're going. It's actually perpetuating the crisis and turning one crisis into multiple crises. And it's not the people shooting out the information. It's not their fault. It's people who have given up on taking the time to research and logically process the information, or they've gotten in the habit of not doing that. That's what I've seen anyway. But the news that you're getting from all these different sources, it is hard to, and the more concerning thing is the large news organizations, the syndicated news organizations that have a reputation seem to be doing this as well. And a lot of bias confirmation where somebody, instead of being professional and looking at things, maybe getting an opinion from somebody who's on the opposite side to balance out your view on something, they're just taking it. It's like, I've been saying that for years. Put it out there. This had to have happened. And it's just not very professional. There's been a lot of retractions lately, more retractions in the media that I've seen ever, because of the information that's being put out. But by the time they retract it, it's too late because they've perpetuated the crisis and caused people around the world to get spun up and angry and going out and hurting other people in these protests and things. And so, but there are the ground truth of it all from my contacts. And I want to caveat, I did not go to Israel, and I'll explain why, but my contacts on the ground, life is going on. Rockets in Israel is not a new thing. It's been going on for years, decades.
Right.
Hamas has been bombing Israel for decades. You can't go a few months without a rocket hitting somewhere. The level of it's more, and then of course this operation that happened where they went in and killed so many people changes things greatly, and is definitely it's catastrophic for them and definitely hurts. But the other side of things, for the people in the occupied areas, there are people there that are getting hurt and killed, and collateral damage is like we like to call it, in the military. For you and I, that's just, we expect that. It's war. I wrote an article about that a couple of weeks ago because everybody was asking me, it's like, oh, they can't go in, they're going to kill people and innocent lives are going to be taken. It's like, yes, no matter what you do, no matter what side you're on in war, that is exactly what's going to happen. There's no good outcome. It's bad all around for everybody. There's no winners. War sucks. So there are people dying on that side as well. But it is kind of concerning the amount of misinformation, disinformation that's coming out on both sides, and the way people will latch onto that, capitalize off of it, and make money off of it is pretty disgusting, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And it's like like you said, they perpetuate it. And let's say, who benefits from the negative part of it? Should I say the military industrial complex, or should I say Iran? Because Iran wants fear, because the way the terrorists work is if they have you in fear, they've won.
Yeah.
And that's,
well, and if you think about 9/11, what has changed since everybody's saying that this is Israel's 9/11? What has changed in our country since 9/11? They didn't need to do too much there. The attack was horrific,
Right.
of course. But on the grand scheme of things, if you look at all the death around the world from warlords and conflicts, and I'm involved in all of them, unfortunately, it's actually small scale, the amount of people that died. But the effect it had on our culture and society has
changed everything.
It's changed everything. And so I think the same thing with Israel, this kind of a catastrophic event that's so shocking to everybody, but actually shouldn't be so shocking when you're surrounded by people who've been saying they're going to do this for a long time, that live within your own borders. But it will change things for Israel on a large scale. It's something they've been having a hard time with. I was supposed to go there on Saturday. Yeah. I have a nonprofit, and we helped out a lot in Ukraine. What we did was we worked with the civilians there to train them up in trauma, first aid, and how to, go into a war zone in a convoy safely when you have no weapons, and, doing humanitarian work. And when this kicked off, of course, I got a lot of calls and people like, hey, we want to donate. We want to help. Can you, what are you going to do there? And I said, well, we could probably do something similar. So I started spinning up. Well, I reached out to my friends in the IDF, and they're like, don't come here.
Fair enough.
Like, well, what? Well, why not? I said, and I kind of was hurt at first. I was like, what? You want our help? And they're like, we're going to need your help. We don't need it now, and you're not going to be able to go anywhere anyway. Everything's locked down. The military, you're not going to be able to go south without special permission unless you're a reporter or something like that. You're not going to be able to go north because they're starting to get, activities starting to happen up there. You're going to be stuck in Tel Aviv. And my job going out there was to meet with key leaders, engage with community leaders to arrange training for civilians. So I was like, okay. But the other thing that came out of those conversations was, we don't want your help right
now.
I know that's not harsh.
What good can you do for us?
Well, and the other thing is Israel, with their history, having gone through the Holocaust and World War II and that whole thing, and the reason why they've been so proactive on security and training up their military and having their military be top notch, was to be able to defend their people against that ever happening.
Absolutely.
Again. And so when I step into it, and I try to do this with anything I get into when it comes to humanitarian work, whether it's on my business or on the nonprofit side, is how do they view it? And me coming in and saying, hey, I can rescue you, or I have training that you don't have, or I can do this better, isn't necessarily the best way to approach things. So, of course, it makes you kind of like, because you want to do something, right? You have a heart to help people. We're protectors. We don't want to see people needlessly suffer. We want to take it to bad guys. That's what we've done for years. But we also take something away from patriots in their own country when we do stuff
it's in
like
our
that.
DNA. It's in our blood. I mean, we're prior military. First thing I want to do, I want to jump on a jet. And I'm like, well, Mark, can you really do much for them? Not really. What are you going to really do? You're 50 plus years old, and you have some Marine Corps training, but really, what really good are you going to be with IDF and over there? You have to learn their system and processes and the battle formations. And Mark, you're better off doing fundraising in the backcountry.
Yeah, well, and honestly, they're not going to do anything with any of us unless we're contracted through the government to do something.
That's a good point.
And typically, they're going to meet and use coalition forces. We've worked, Israel's got a lot of same training, a lot of same tactics we do. But they're going to work, the governments are going to work together because they want to maintain that control. And us going over to do whatever, it's going to have to go through governments, and they're going to have to approve it, and you're not going to be driving around just like I'm all right now. You're not going to be driving around like an operator,
not going to work out
without optic checkpoints and scrutinizing what you're doing there and why you're there. And if you don't have a good reason, that happens to me anyway. When I go to Israel, they have good security, great security. I never feel more secure than when I go to Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. And it's because they really screen people when they're going through the airport. I go in with a sat phone every time, and every time I end up with an hour-long interrogation or interview, where they look at my computer and do all this stuff. That's normal time.
Wow.
So you can imagine how they're really going to be scrutinizing who's coming in and who's doing what and why you're doing it. And it's better to have, the support of the government behind you. I found that out. Same thing in Ukraine. Ukraine, I remember the first time it really hit me was with the tier 1 operator guys, CAD guys. We were doing some stuff there. We had been trying to get people out from behind enemy lines. We went to meet with this guy who was a head of a orphanage over there. I remember he came up, we started talking, and immediately he goes, "Why should I listen to you guys? When you lost Afghanistan." Ooh. And I was like, all three of us just kind of went and got a little bit, spun up, and we're like, and then one of them goes, "Yeah, touche." It's
the truth. What do you say? You can't debunk it.
We didn't lose Afghanistan. You and I know we didn't lose Afghanistan. That was a political decision, but at the same time, we don't have the same kind of clout that we used to have. And so I had to live that down quite a few times in Ukraine when I was working with people and build trust and get them to understand, look, I'm not here to fight your war. I'm here to help you guys survive and help your civilian population who's been left behind, by the way, while you're focused on the military. And that, of course, smoothed things over. But even with that, things happen. I got kicked out of I didn't get kicked out of the country. I got banned from going to Ukraine. I couldn't go back in. Nobody knows why. They're still trying to figure it out. It's government bureaucracy. We got a speeding ticket I didn't know about or something. But it's like those kinds of things happen. So if you want to go in to work at a place, you have to be really ready and prepared and make sure that you have the support you need and that you're providing something realistic that's actually relevant to what they need, what they're asking for. And they don't know what they need right now. Right now, they do have a pretty good control over the situation. Now, there is also you'll feel some pushback sometimes with people when they're in crisis, where they get a little bit angry about it and they especially type A's like us, who are protectors or in the military. It's like, I don't need your help. And so on the other hand, I had to talk to them a little bit. It's like, look, 9/11 happened for us. We definitely needed help from our coalition partners to fight that war. We couldn't have done it without them. And when we did come together with them, it was, sometimes we make fun of each other a little bit because, some standards were different than others or whatever, but we still appreciated each other. I said, you're fighting this war here in Israel, but I guarantee you, and this was before all these protests, so I guarantee you this is going to pop off around the world and you're going to need support. I said, and you're going to need support from people. And by saying, I don't need support from anybody, we're good, you're actually shutting down those opportunities. I said, there's going to be a lot of things happening around you. Right now, you're dealing internally in the country, but there are countries all around you that want to get involved in this. And you may end up fighting an actual war.
Right.
Because they're like, we'll be fine. We're good. I was like, yeah, you fought a war in the past. It was 6 days. It's not a protracted, long-term, insurgency. And I said, you may be facing that at this point. So if people reach out or want to help, don't shut that down. Leave those doors open. There was good conversations. And I had those conversations with a few different people. Said, hey, we're going to sit back and we're going to see how this develops over the next few months and then decide what kind of support we can bring to you guys right now. Because it's not Ukraine. Israel's not Ukraine.
It's a different animal.
They have a better economy. They have a better military. They had a better military set up to respond, to react. They have a lot more support than Ukraine had when this first kicked off. And so it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. But there's rocket attacks every day. There's still a couple hundred hostages, which is astronomical. We've already had to deal with a couple of things, on that together. And I've never heard of that large of a group being taken. And I do think that's causing a problem with the invasion timeline and things, like that. They knew what they were doing when they took those hostages, this leverage, and it has to do with global support,
I heard from somebody else I had a talk with. I'm not going to say who, but that person basically was in Israel. And he said, Biden is pretty much talking to the prime minister right now, and he's just trying to delay the IDF from going into Gaza right now because of the hostages, and they're just trying to buy time. I'm not an Israeli military expert. I'm not going to tell them how to do whatever they got to do, but what's your thoughts on that strategy with Biden?
you got to sit back. I do KNR negotiation and have dealt with hostages in the past. Rushing in is never a good idea. The problem with this one is a compounded hostage / we have indirect fire coming in or missile fire coming in and targeting our people, as well as ground troops coming in and targeting our people. So it's not simple. At the same time, if they are really concerned about the hostages and minimizing, the death that could happen from that, they do need to take a step back. The hardest thing for me when I do those types of negotiation, that's just with one or two individuals, is when law enforcement or the military or the government gets involved. Now, there's two sides to this. My involvement in it is, hey, we're going to pay a ransom and get these people back, or we're going to negotiate to get these people back. That's my job. That's what the family wants, and they're going to pay for it. And it sucks because you're giving money to bad organizations that are going to put it back into circulation. At the same time, I'm not going to tell somebody to say, hey, we don't want to fund this bad group, so we're just going to forget about your loved ones.
Right.
So there's two sides. The other side is the government side of things, where they want to get them back without getting any, giving any leverage to the hostage takers. They don't want to give them money. They want to get them too. They want to capture them and interrogate them and get them off the streets, whatever. It's very difficult to do that. There's a lot of risk in that, but there's also the risk with this one of, missile strikes, them using them as human shields to continue to kill more people, and destroy more infrastructure and deteriorate their ability to fight what is going to happen, which is essentially a ground war. So kind of like you think about it with us, if somebody had taken hostages in Afghanistan or Iraq, did it change the way we conducted military operations?
Nope, not really.
Just no. I mean, SF might get involved, right, and try and do the recovery or something, but it can't stop the forward movement. Just like we can't capitulate to countries that have their finger on a red button, a nuclear power. We still got to plan our operations if that didn't exist. So I think they're showing a lot of restraint, which is good. But the thing Israel's fighting is not. They could go in and wipe out Gaza today.
Yeah.
Right? And it wouldn't take very long at all. But they're fighting a PR issue with the rest of us around the world. They also have to worry about these other countries that are surrounding them. Lebanon's a lot more organized. A lot more organized military. So does Syria. If they kick off, what's going to happen with those forces? Is it going to give them the reason they need to invade and start conducting more operations in Israel or around the world? So it's complex, man. And I think they're doing a fairly decent job. They've shown more restraint than I thought they needed to when it comes to the invasion of the ground. And I think that's a good sign that cooler heads are prevailing. Whatever Biden wants, I don't really care. It's Netanyahu, it's Israel, it's their ground commanders that are making the calls. And I think that's important to take the politics out of it and just dumb it down to there are victims, there are innocent people, individuals, children, women, elderly people that are in horrific situations right now that need to be helped, period. That's it. Whatever the politics of that are, it doesn't really bother me.
You said something that caught my attention is I thought for sure IDF would be on the ground in Gaza way 5 days ago. And first was the weather, and then Biden strategically planned a trip out there when everybody canceled meeting with him after the hostages were taken. And I think everybody thought, the battleship group would start throwing rockets into Lebanon. That never happened. And I think it's been a big game of patience, a chess game almost on the ground. And I'm surprised Israel's held back as long as they have myself. I'm like, whoa, they haven't gone in yet? Huh. What are they doing? And then all of a sudden you see the hostages kind of start trickling out.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's that. You got to look at this from a ground commander's perspective. Sure. I think the good thing about Israel's government is they listen to their commanders on the ground. And most of those guys have the same mindset that you and I have when it comes to civilians. there's a lot of propaganda pushed out there, and a lot of civilians who have no clue because they've never been on the battlefield. And I'm sorry to say that, but it's the truth. We don't understand that we don't go in to kill civilians and hurt people. When we went to Afghanistan, I was in Afghanistan in 2002 during the invasion. We didn't go there to target the civilians. We were looking for Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And that's who we targeted. And yes, civilians did die during those times. Airstrikes are difficult. You do the best you can. Same thing with Iraq. We didn't go in to target civilians. There were specific things that we had to look for when we did the invasion, right? They had to have boots on them. They had to be talking on a sat phone or something like that. They had to have a weapon. There's rules of engagement. And I think it's the same for these commanders on the ground. They want to get as many civilians out of those occupied territories as they can. They care. They do care. And that's a hard thing. The problem is people lump people into two groups and they think everybody is that way. And it's really dangerous. That's the dangerous mindset that people have. That's true. That's not the way people typically operate, especially when they're on the ground and they're used to seeing evil face to face. It's not like they're going around just headshot, ready to nuke an entire group of people. True. And they understand the mentality of the people who have lived underneath a terrorist organization for the last decade. There's a lot of fear there they're dealing with, and there's a lot of they're being manipulated a lot. So. It's got you got to look at it that way. I think they're listening to the ground commanders. I'm sure they want to do their job, Roger Moss, but they also don't want a bunch of civilians in the way, and they've been known to use them as human shields before. So I think that's what you're seeing, and then people just pick up on that and kind of throw their sound bites out so they can get their clicks. Exactly.